Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I do not believe we have any agenda updates. With that, I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Mr. Biondo.
Present.
Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Boomer.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Present.
Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Girl. Mrs. Bora.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Jury.
Present.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Nicolosi.
Here.
Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Sassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott. Mr. Wilson.
Present.
17 present, 3 absent.
Thank you, Clerk McCall. With that, I will turn things over to Mr. Biondo for the prayer and pledge. Mr. Biondo.
Heavenly Father, give us the wisdom and knowledge that we may provide leadership for our constituents, for who is able to govern without your guidance. Give us the eyes to see them, the ears to listen to their concerns, and the hands to serve them in all we do. We need your intervention in finding solutions to problems that still exist in our society despite our best efforts. Father, help us prepare for issues that come before this body tonight so that we may make the best decisions for all concerned. Lastly, Father, help us to see not our differences, but how much we have in common. Please unify us in our ideas and in every action as we seek to create a community that is better each day than the day before. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to bring Judge Collins up. We have a very short proclamation on Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and then Judge Collins is going to speak briefly on the discussion going on in the community regarding the Family Justice Center discussion that's ongoing. I would just add as an aside, last night I spoke to Mayor McNamara in the city of Rockford, and we have our Mayor and Chairman's Youth Leadership Council, and about half of our council sat in on a presentation related to domestic violence, which was an extra thing in their membership. And the mayor called me and said it shocked him at the number of our members of our council that had very specific real stories related to family and domestic violence. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion on this topic in the community, but it was evident the alarmingly high level in which folks that are part of our little council have been affected and have seen it or have experience with it in some way. With that said, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is October. Whereas domestic violence crosses all socio-economic lines, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender, age, education, employment, and marital status. Whereas in the state of Illinois, domestic violence survivors and their children received over 521,000 hours of service from domestic violence programs during our last fiscal year. Whereas in 2017, the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department responded to over 1,500 domestic violence calls in Winnebago County. Whereas in 2017, over 1,500 child and adult victims of domestic violence received direct services, including emergency, shelter, legal advocacy, and counseling from the local domestic violence program, Remedies Renewing Lives. Likewise, over 2,400 emergency orders of protection were requested in our county last year. Whereas throughout the month of October, the Family Violence Coordinating Council and other prevention groups will be hosting several events to bring awareness to the issue of domestic violence and thus give hope to all victims of abuse struggling with the issue. Whereas the 17th Judicial Circuit Court has been a leader in reducing domestic violence and has secured state and federal grants totaling approximately $5.2 million. Now therefore be it resolved, I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, and on behalf of our entire board, do hereby proclaim October 2018 Domestic Violence Awareness Month. In Winnebago County, encourage all citizens to rally support for domestic violence victims and to volunteer with organizations pledging to end this crime that plagues not only our county, but also society at large. So with that, I would like to turn things over to our friend, Judge Collins, who's done a lot of work on this topic, to talk about the Family Justice Center. So with that, we'll welcome Judge Collins. Thank you, Judge.
So thank you very much for letting me come and talk to you again. It's always a pleasure for me to come here. Domestic violence is everybody's business. We know that it affects all of us in the community in one way or the other. We recently did a study of juveniles in the juvenile detention system, and we found that 75% of them had been in prior police reports noted as being in homes where there was domestic violence. They were either witnesses to it or as victims of it. So when you want to look at juvenile crime in our community, you have to look at domestic violence. If you want to look at keeping our police officers safe, you have to look at domestic violence. 24% of all police officers killed in the line of duty are killed responding to domestic violence cases by a perpetrator armed with a firearm. It affects all of our children in our schools, it affects all of us in our work, and it certainly is a huge driving force and consumer of all of our resources. We've done a lot to try to work on the issue of domestic violence, so much so that we were recognized by the Department of Justice as one of the leaders in the country and being named a mentor court for our outstanding practices on domestic violence. But it's not enough. It's not going to stop. And we know that we can't, the courts, can't deal with the issue of domestic violence in a way that stops in our community. The police can't stop it in our community. What we need to do is we need to empower survivors of domestic violence and give opportunities for children to get the kind of help and counseling they need so that they can break these chains of violence. And that's what the Family Justice Center is all about. And I really want to thank the Winnebago County Board. I was going to show the video that we did because you're all in it, and it's great. So I really encourage you to look at it. They wouldn't get, I didn't have enough time for that. They wouldn't give me the whole meeting. So I didn't have enough time to show it to you, but I really encourage you to look at it. It's a great visual showing of what the toll of domestic violence is in our community, and it also shows the community coming together work on the Family Justice Center. We recently got a grant from the federal government to help us move forward with the Family Justice Center in our planning stage, and so that's where we are with that. We also, what the chairman didn't tell you, he was going to be with me today at 1 o'clock today, but he was getting an award in Chicago, so he couldn't make it. But we also were just recently awarded $400,000 by the Department of Justice to work on elder abuse in our community. So it's brand new money that's coming in to help us deal with one of the biggest issues we have, which is the abuse of people later in life. Now, I personally have some problems with how they define elder abuse because it's anyone over 50. So, you know. But that's unfortunately the statistics, as they show that that's really the at-risk population once you're over 50. I see somebody pointing out everybody who's over 50 here. So it's by that kind of cooperation, because that grant was actually a grant we wrote with the chairman, and the chairman helped us put that forward. And many of our grants have been done that. And the main reason we've been able to pull in $5.2 million from federal monies for this community to work on issues like the Family Justice Center grant is because of the great cooperation we've had from the county board, our county board chairman, and other members of our community. So it's been very rewarding to me. You know, I'm retiring pretty soon. So I just want to thank all of you for your work in this area, for your continued commitment to resolving the issues of family violence and domestic violence, for your focus on survivors and victims, and the knowledge that what we do to help them helps us all as we go through life and helps our community. So thank you very much for all you've done. If you have any questions, we have a packet that's in here that has information about the activities on Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and there's other information on there where you can find out more if you need to know it. And I'm always available at any time if you have any questions about what's going on about domestic violence, or where any of your constituents can get the help they might need to help deal with this problem.
Thank you, Judge Collins. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Rosemary, Judge Collins, you and I go back a long time. I want to thank you for your years of service and your compassion for your cause. I just hope that we continue this in this county. I know how much it means to you. I would just like to remind the board when I gave my portion of my $1,000, which we are all entitled to give to somebody, the board, whether you know this or not, I gave it to the Safe Harbor for Children on behalf of the county board, so you did help Rosemary. Again, happy retirement, and we'll have coffee together.
Well, that sounds good. Let me just clarify though, you didn't help Rosemary. That money actually went to help children who are in need in our community. And I appreciate it, the gesture, but Children's Safe Harbor and our director, Megan Brashan, is here, along with other members of our great team that work on these issues. But they help children. Most of the clients of Children's Safe Harbor are children under the age of 5. And that's who you're helping, are those children who need some assistance during this very difficult period in their parents' lives. So thank you, Gary, and thank you all county board members.
Thank you, Judge. And Mr. Jury, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to ask how the Justice Center is coming along, and if you could maybe give us some information, or maybe come in at a later time and give a presentation on that.
I'd love to.
I was able to attend last year's, I think, press conference on the Children's Safe Harbor, where they got some donations and grant funding for that. So I really think that it makes sense to bring everything in-house, the services, whatever it is with domestic violence, as well as, you know, the Children's Safe Harbor. I hope that comes to fruition with the supervision of children. So I want to applaud that, and also, you know, just if you could elaborate a little bit on the Justice Center, where we're headed, if you can give any secrets, I guess, at this point in time. So.
Sure, yeah, don't tell anybody, but no, we were able to raise the money we needed to raise to hire the consultants that will be coming in. That's all from private monies that were raised for those consultants who have set up family justice centers throughout our country and also overseas. So these are the people who really started the family justice movement. They know how to do it. They know how to help us do it, and so we are hiring them in as our experts. And they're coming in February, so by the community's generosity, we're able to bring them in. And then the federal grant that we got will help us move forward through the planning stages throughout that. There's going to be additional fundraising as time goes on, but right now we're fairly solid with that issue, and we're going to start planning. We're doing listening sessions a lot now throughout the community. We're going around and asking people in the community what they want in the Family Justice Center, because it's important that the Family Justice Center really reflects the needs of the community, not just what I think it should be, but what people who need it are going to need. And I've done some visiting of Family Justice Centers on my own time and found out what works in some communities and what doesn't. So we're really poised to move forward, but we're going to do it right. And so sometimes that takes a little longer. We're all anxious to get it started, but we're going to do it right, and we're going to take the time it needs to do it right. So I think that this is realistically about a 2 to 3 year project that we're looking at. And I'd be happy to come back. I know your agenda is really packed, but when you have some cold winter day where you don't have much on there, let me come back and I give you a lot more information about the Family Justice Center. Thank you.
Look forward to that day for more than one reason. We'll take a quick picture here.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge. This again, sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right.
Thank you all for all you do to help us.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you again, Judge Collins. Next item of business, we have no public comment tonight, so we'll move on to the approval of minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from September 6th, 13th, and the 20th, and to lay over the minutes from September 27th of 2018. May I please have a motion? I have a motion by Mrs. Goral, a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any questions on the minutes before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, announcements and communications. Clerk McCall.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
We will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. Next item of business, board member correspondence. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got several here tonight. The first being the Veterans Stand Down. It's October 26th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Melson Performing Arts, 406 North Main Street, and you've been invited. The next one is the African American Resource Center at Booker is having a fundraiser at Giovanni's on November the 1st. The keynote speaker is Maurice West II, and the ticket prices are $75 each. The third thing I have here is Winnebago County Veterans Association and Veterans Memorial Hall and Museum presents their 78th Annual Veterans Dinner, Saturday, November 3rd, 2018. The keynote speaker is Rear Admiral, retired Samuel J. Cox. He was the Director of Naval History and Heritage Command. This will be held at Giovanni's as well. Ticket prices are $35 each. I believe the chairman has decided he's going to purchase a table. We talked the other day. And the last one I got, how being part of history turned into a memoir. This will happen at Veterans Memorial Hall, again Thursday, November 1st, 6 o'clock p.m. in the auditorium. And the person that's keynote is Angela Bellato. She's a Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired, and she has a PhD. And her book, Angel's Truck Stop, A Woman's Love, Laughter, and Loss During the Vietnam War Crisis. And she does have a book to sell for $25, and 10% of the book sales will go to Mines Advisory Group and a target to removing unexploded ordnance, UXOs, and LAOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any other board members under board member correspondence? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report. It'll be brief. I just wanted to acknowledge that Glenn Trommels from the IT department in the city of Rockford is here today, along with Mr. Gettner from our IT department, and they'll be available regarding the discussion related to shared records management, which is before the board tonight. A partnership with the city of Rockford, who's leading the project, that I think is going to be a key factor to improve public safety outcomes in the coming years. So thank you, Glenn, for being here. With that, we'll move on to the county administrative report. Carla, do you have anything?
I don't have much. I've been gone the last couple of days, but I did speak today at the Illinois Government Finance Officers Association Debt Institute. And there was a speaker there talking about the bond market, and I want to get the handout for all of you. They talked about how all of us in Illinois, local governments in Illinois, pay a premium on debt just because we are located in the state of Illinois. And then they had a handout by debt rating, how much additional interest you pay based on that debt rating. So I'm going to get a hold of that and share that with all of you. Thank
you very much, Carla. Appreciate that. Next item of business is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes the raffle report. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda? I got a motion by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Fiducia and Fellers. Any discussion on the consent agenda before the board this evening? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, standing committee reports. Finance Committee, Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finance Committee report. I'd like to move to approve resolution authorizing settlement of a claim against the County of Winnebago entitled Arthur Blewett versus Winnebago County. It was unanimously approved by the Finance Committee.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo on the Finance Committee item 2, the settlement lawsuit. May I have a second? I have a motion by Mr. Biondo, a second by Mrs. Crosby. Any discussion on item 2 before the board on our Finance Committee? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo.
I'd like to then move to approve resolution authorizing settlement of a claim against the County of Winnebago entitled Dominic Barcelona versus Winnebago County. That was also approved unanimously, and this gentleman is back to work.
Got a motion by Mr. Biondo on item 3, the Barcelona settlement. I have a motion by Mr. Biondo and a second by Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Jury, any discussion on item 3? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Wilson? Oh, I apologize. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Did you have a comment then after,
Yes, I do.
after the fact, Mr. Wilson?
This comment goes to Kim Ponder. Are we still doing root cause analysis on all of these claims that are being filed?
Mrs. Ponder?
Thank you. Yes, we are for offices that request our participation in those matters.
So we're not totally doing it then?
If we're asked by an elected office to participate, we will do that.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Next item of business, I'll go back to Mr. Biondo for item 4.
Yes, I'd like to read in ordinance creating sections of Chapter 2, Article 2, Division 1, which are the pension obligation bond policy of the county code of ordinances to be laid over.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo.
I didn't know if we wanted to suspend the rules now. All right, that concludes our report.
Thank you very much. We've laid over item 4, and thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Next item of business, Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. The Zoning Committee has a few items on our agenda for you tonight. Let me try to do this way. The first 4, these are all ones that were read in at our prior county board meeting. The first 4, and for the record, they are, number 1 is VO 318, it's a variance. Number 2 is VO 418, that's a variant. And number 3 is also a variance, VO 518. Number 4, special use permit, SUO 318. For the record, all of these come with conditions, and they came from the Zoning Board of Appeals with unanimous approval, and they all had unanimous approval at the Zoning Committee as well. So unless someone wants to separate these out, I would make, if with permission, I would like to make a motion to approve all 4 of these.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster to approve items 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 3 variances in the special use permit. I have a second by Mr. Hoffman. Items 1, 2, 3, and 4 are now before the board under Zoning Committee. Any discussion on these 4 items before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We've passed 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mr. Webster.
Okay, moving right along. Number 5 then, the final one is VO 618. That's a variance as well. And this came from Zoning Board of Appeals with approval, but it failed at Zoning Committee. And this one is for the variance to increase the height for the silo and conveyor at the asphalt plant from 50 feet to 80 feet. I think we're all aware of this one. So I would move to approve, I guess.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster on item 5, the variance related to the asphalt plant. May I have a second? I have a second by Mrs. Gorel and by Mr. Salgado. Item is now before the board. Just for my clarification, do you mind giving the vote count on the ZBA and Zoning Committee, how the counts came out, Mr. Webster?
Let me see here. Mr. Kraft, do you have the vote count handy? I don't have it right in front of me. I think it was 4-1 at ZBA, and I think it was 3-2 or 4-2 at zoning.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other comments, questions by board members on item 5? With that, oh yes, Mrs. Gorel.
I will not be voting on this tonight. When this was first presented to us as the batch plan, one of the things that was not presented well, there was a business plan. It should have been in the original plan that went in. It shouldn't be a variance after the fact. They got they said, yeah, you're going to have the batch plan. Now they come back and they want a variance to it. It should have been done the first time around, not the second time around. And not only that, when you actually add with the conveyors and everything, that's going to be quite a bit above ground level, even on the tallest wall there. And I won't vote for it because it should have all been wrapped up the first time around, not come back now. What are they going to come back after next? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, I will ask I'm sorry, I see 2 hands shoot up there at the end. Mr. Schultz.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just speaking in agreement with Mrs. Gorel that it is insult to injury. You know, this is a painful process. The citizens of my district were not heard on this matter. It was significantly important to them. And so after the fact, after a long, drawn-out, very painful process that was a punch in the face, we now have immediately thereafter a variation. And I just find it insulting and think that it's a shame that they didn't deal with this appropriately in the first round. They had 2 years to bring this forward initially. And then the second comment is just that we, again, on a controversial issue, had a problem with new testimony being brought to the county board members between the ZBA and the vote. And it happened again, and it's inappropriate, it's harmful, it undermines the process, it opens up the county to lawsuits, and it creates a problem for us. So as county board members, we need to take seriously that the testimony that's given at ZBA is what we're supposed to make the decision on, and we're not supposed to bring new information, new facts, new conversation into the dialogue. We can reference existing testimony, but we can't bring new testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Jury.
Well, you know, I sympathize with Mr. Schultz. I think everybody did have a fair hearing, and everybody had the ability to either question it or not. And the testimony is over now, it passed. But Mr. Webster, are you aware that this was in the ordinance that we passed about coming up with the 50-foot? Are you aware of that? Or maybe Mr. Troy can fill us in. Good.
I'm not sure.
Could
I ask for a clarification on the question, just so I'm clear, Mr. Chairman?
I'm asking if this was in the original ordinance that we had when we passed it, and I would like Troy to explain.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Jury. Troy, could you offer any potential possible clarification on that if you're able to do so, sir?
There was a condition in the special use ordinance addressing the possibility of a variation.
Okay, thank you. And since it's part of the testimony, and since we have professional staff speaking, they're typically, as part of testimony, the administration, the Planning and Development Office will weigh in with an administrative recommendation. Is that correct, Troy? In a normal zoning matter, the administration or your office will weigh in with a recommendation on a particular item. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you weigh in on this particular matter?
We did. We found the standards to be met, so therefore we supported the variation request.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other follow-ups or any other questions by board members? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, I just got to go on the record that I find it objectionable that in a highly controversial matter that this is the occasion that you choose to reference staff report. We have often gone against what the staff report was. We have often not even referred to it, especially on the board floor. So I find that objectionable.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Webster.
Yes. I was going to try to refrain from speaking much on this issue, but the door has been opened by Angie, and Mr. Schultz, and Mr. Jury, and by you yourself. It would seem that that's somewhat of a salesmanship job on your part to do that now at this late in the game. As for what Angie was saying, and Stephen alluded to as well, was that we've been dealing with this particular issue for over 2 years now with this site. And we all know that it got withdrawn once, and then they came back a second time. And what we're saying is that, we're all saying, what happened at committee when we discussed it there, was that you would think that having over 2 years to work on this, that the plan would come together more cohesively when it was brought in. And what Stephen is saying as well is that in our districts, the 3 of our districts come together in Rockton. And you have several thousand people in Rockton that quite simply, for whatever their reasons are just opposed to it. And so that's where they're so upset about this. And finally, speaking to the issue there that Mr. Schultz also brought up, there has been after the fact information brought in, which should have been totally ignored. There was some brought in, once again, at caucus Tuesday evening. And that was wrong, absolutely wrong. And so let that be known as, once again, as Mr. Schultz pointed out, after the fact information was not brought into the Zoning Board of Appeals is what opens up the county board for future lawsuits.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other comments? Mr. Salgado.
Yes, I just want to make a comment. I sympathize with everybody. I was opposed to the asphalt plant. I'll say it on record. I was. But at the end of the day, we're talking about the variation. We're not talking about, we're like going backwards. I mean, I just don't get it. I mean, it passed. Why are we going back? Let's talk about the variation, why it doesn't meet the standards, or why we shouldn't approve the variation. We can get all mad and fussy about it that, you know, the asphalt plant was passed. It got passed. There's nothing we can do about it. About the testimony, yeah, you know, testimony is what was given at the ZBA, not with whoever presented after the fact. But I just find it hard that we're still arguing about this and expressing our frustration. Great, you know, I was opposed to it. But at the end of the day, let's talk about the variation, what we need, what's at hand here, and move on. I mean, that's what I just gotta say that.
Any other comments, questions by board members? Hearing none, we'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Biondo?
No.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer?
No.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Girl? Mrs. Gore?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Jury?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
No.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
No.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
2 absent. 8 yes. I mean 8 no. 10 yes.
10 yes, so motion passes.
8 no.
Just a clarification on the floor, 10 yes votes, 8 no votes, motion passes. Mr. Webster.
Because that came from,
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Schultz.
I don't think we have 18 people here.
We do. Dorothy came in late.
Yeah, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
That's good.
No problem at all.
just for clarification,
Yes,
I'll
sir.
make sure we got this legally correct. because this came with at least one no vote on ZBA, does this require a simple majority?
Mr. Kurlikas.
Yeah, the only change of, other than requiring a simple majority would have been if there had been an adjacent property owner or a village or township to file an objection. So other than that, it would require a simple majority.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Operations Committee, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Your Operations and Administrative Committee has several resolutions and ordinance before you this evening. The first one is a resolution authorizing the transfer of Winges funds from the county to Region 1 Planning Council, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on the resolution authorizing the transfer of Winges funds from the county to R1 Planning Council. I got a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion by board members on item 2? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. The next one, we have a resolution awarding bids for snow plowing services, and I also move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on the resolution awarding the bid for snow plowing services. A second by Mr. Hoffman. Item is before the board. Any questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. The next one is a resolution authorizing the chairman of Winnebago County to execute an agreement for recruiting social media digital geofencing campaign with WTVO, WQRF, ABC. I move for its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Jury on item 4, which is the geofencing resolution. May I have a second? I have a second by Mr. Kelly and Mrs. Gorel. Item is before the board. Any comments by board members? Mr. Nicolosi.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for the record, I've kind of been vocal about this. I just feel it's very unethical to hire the news media as a vendor. It kind of threatens the checks and balances that we know is government and democracy. That's all I have to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Point of just Mrs. Ponder, I know we discussed this in the Operations Committee, and again, I hope this is for just discussion that has occurred at the committee level. This is meant not as disrespect to anybody on our board, but I just wanted to make sure we're clear on one item. Can you just give a quick review of the process, Kim, for us?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We actually went out and did a reach out to individuals asking for resources that we could pursue in this matter and got a minimal response. So we did contact our local media groups. I went out on the internet and resourced the top 3 geofencing organizations, and I used those as our pool for consideration. We reached out to the local media representatives, and we only received a response from Comcast, and they did not have a geofencing product. For the other 3 top candidates for geofencing in the industry, their minimum monthly request for services was well above, it was more than double what we had expenses available to spend for the services. And then that was WTVO.
Kim, just to follow up, have we in the past ever engaged with any particular media partner for any type of public or county related business?
We have.
Okay.
We have posted, we have run advertisements on occasions. It's been a while, not very recently, but yes, we have.
Okay, thank you very much. Follow up, Mrs. Gorham.
Thank you. If we were to do this in the newspaper and we did it weekly, looking for jobs, the amount that this isn't even close to what we would be paying the Rockford newspaper or any other surrounding areas. We are going into a new era where people don't go to job fairs anymore, and if they do, they aren't the best type of personnel that you might want to hire. We're having enough problems right now trying to get people, and as you look at the brochure that we had in our agenda today, you will see that this is really targeted, this one's targeted basically for River Bluff, but this is actually targeted for all offices. If you ever want to go in and find out what we have available in Winnebago County for jobs, have fun looking for them, because they are posted, but they aren't posted, and you have to know what you're really doing. This gives us an opportunity to reach out to even more areas to do good research and look for more qualified personnel than what we are actually interviewing and getting in the process. This is a new way, people. It's cheaper than the newspaper, and if it works, and again, I believe, Kim, how long is the contract for? Kim?
It would be for 1 year.
And if it doesn't work and we don't get the type of personnel we want, we can always drop it and go on to other venues that that will help us do this. Okay. And if all the other television channels were contacted and they don't do this, then we picked the right one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other comments? Follow up by Mr. Nicolosi.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make clear that I'm not necessarily against the idea of doing this. I'm not going to micromanage the process, but there are plenty of vendors out there, and maybe we need to take more time looking. Again, the news media just shouldn't be considered when there are countless other vendors out there. We just need to look a little harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolosi. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Nicolosi on the no vote will cast a yes vote for all other members present. Motion passes. Mr. Jury, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to have to get Ted a stool. Next, we have an ordinance prohibiting the use of groundwater as a portable water supply by the installation or use of a portable water supply, wells, or any other method. And this is the ordinance is read in for the first time.
Thank you, Mr. Jury.
And I wish to suspend the rules.
We got a motion by Mr. Jury to suspend the rules, which would allow us then in a separate vote to vote this evening. Motion by Mr. Jury to suspend, second by Mrs. Red and Mrs. Gorel. The motion is to suspend the rules before the board right now. Any questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We've suspended the rules, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman. I move for its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Jury on item 5. May I have a second? A second by Mrs. Red and Mrs. Gorel. Again, thank you very much. Item is before the board. Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll ask Clerk McCall to cast a yes vote for all members present. Ordinance passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Next, we have a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute agreement between Winnebago County and Illinois and Remedies, and I move for its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Jury on item 6, the Remedies amendment, a resolution related to remedies. I got a second by Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Gorel. Item is before the board. Any discussion or comments by board members? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On both items 6 and 7, when you get beyond the resolution and you get to the very beginning, first page of each of these items, it gives the dates for both of these as October 1st, 2018 through September 30th, 2018. And I believe that the September 30th date is intended to be 2019 for both items 6 and 7.
So we will make that administrative clerical change to the item before the board for both 6 and 7.
And then just as a second item, we didn't have to, in either of these cases, list out the variety of administrative and direct costs. There's a number of them that are listed: personnel, services, travel, contractual, other costs, equipment, etc. We didn't have to show that grid, but I would suggest that if we choose to do that in the future, that we would actually populate it with the dollar amounts as to how the money will be allocated, that are just don't include it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. I think you make a good point on that. The item before the board is item 6, the remedies contract. Any other discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. The next resolution is authorizing the chairman of the Winnebago County Board to execute an agreement between Winnebago County, Illinois and Rosecrans Incorporated. I move for its adoption.
Got a motion by Mr. Jury on the Rosecrans contract for item 7, a second by Mrs. Gorel. Thank you. Item is before the board, and we'll again note that the contract would run October 1 of 18 through September 30th of 19. Thank you for that correction, Mr. Schultz. Again, that item is before the board now. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Jury.
Thank you again, Mr. Haney. The next resolution we have is a resolution authorizing the chairman of Winnebago County Board to execute an independent contractors agreement for service as Winnebago County Community Liaison between Winnebago County and Tommy Meeks, and I also move for this adoption.
Resolution on the Tommy Meeks contract. I got a second by Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Red, and Mr. Salgado. Thank you. The Tommy Meeks contract is before the board. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Thank you. That concludes our report. We will be having a meeting coming soon. We pulled the phone resolution. There was a couple changes. You'll be getting that. And also we will be bringing again the automobile policy, vehicle policy before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury.
Elsie, Ted, 3 more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Next item of business, Public Works Committee. Mr. Kelly.
Public Works has 2 resolutions this evening. The first is a resolution authorizing the execution of annual professional services agreements with the following firms: Fair Graham for land surveying and engineering, Chastain and Associates for engineering services, Hanson Professional Services for structural engineering services, Testing Service Corporation for geotechnical engineering, material engineering and testing services, Davidson and Associates for real estate appraisal services, and Mazzari Group for real property, doing business as real property consultants for real estate appraisal services. And I'll move its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Kelly on item 2. And I'll have a second by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Tassoni. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on item 2 under the Public Works Committee? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
And our next resolution is a resolution to reject bids for the rehabilitation of well number 1 at the Winnebago Water District Well House number 1. And I move its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Kelly on item 3, the bids for the rehabilitation of well 1. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Tassoni. Thank you very much. Any discussion by board members on the item before the board? Yes, Mr. Biondo.
We're rejecting bids?
There were 3 bids received, and 2 of them were unqualified, and the third one that was qualified was 54% over budget. And the highway department's working to restructure the bidding process. It'll be coming back.
Any other discussion by board members? Okay. So we don't, I mean, just to back up for a second, just from a process standpoint, we don't have to take, we don't have to take action then, do we, Mr. Kurlinkus? Move to reject, okay. Understood.
I was a little confused by that myself.
Yes.
Inaction usually does not require a vote.
So we're taking this motion to reject the bids is before the board. A yes vote would be to reject, go back to the drawing board, so to speak. So a no vote would be to not reject. So with that, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We've rejected the bids. Thank you very much. Mr. Kelly.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next item of business, probably should have moved this up in the agenda with our guest here. I apologize, Mr. Trommels. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Kelly, or Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Safety brings 2 items in tonight. The first item is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute an intergovernmental agreement for the operations and funding of an integrated record management system, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the intergovernmental agreement for the operation and funding of the integrated records management system, RMS. I have a second by Mr. Booker, a second by Mr. Jury. Item is now before the board. Any discussion or questions by board members? I got a couple of hands up. I'll start with Mr. Boomer, then Mrs. Red. Mr. Boomer.
What's the cost?
That would be above my pay grade, Carla.
I believe the capital cost for the first 5 years, maybe Glenn can help me out here. Is he still here?
Yes. Mr. Trommels, yeah, we'll bring you right up here. I do know there is no cost in this fiscal year to the budget. Jump in right there. We'll throw you in a seat.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Trommels. That's the best dressed somebody in that seat's been in a long time.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the nice comments. The capital cost for the project is $529,000. That does not include the interest amount on that. We estimated 3.5% interest, maybe go a little higher with the current Fed interest rate hike. With interest, about $577,000.
And did we, Mr. Trommels, did we confirm the State Representative Sosnowski's help at this point in securing some additional funding, or is that yet to be officially tied down? It's in process.
Yet to be officially announced.
Okay. Well, I think we just tipped our hand, but there's some potential underwriting of the overall cost that may come into play. Carla, you had a follow-up?
How much was that? It was over 5 years, the capital.
Correct, over a 5-year period. A couple other comments, if I may.
Yes, sir.
So the city of Rockford is financing this whole deal for the entire project. We're not going to issue an invoice to the county until November of 2019 for this project. So we don't have to start paying back that debt for a year, so we're not going to charge any project participants for that amount of time either.
Thank you. I know I missed some hands up, and if I go out of order, I apologize. Mr. Boomer, I'm going to go back to you on a follow-up, then Mrs. Red is next. Mr. Boomer on a follow-up.
Is that both the city and the county's investment, or just the county?
Just the county.
Thank you, Mr. Boomer. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions. I think, if I understood this correctly, this is so that we can share information between the 2 departments, right? The sheriff and the police department?
Let's back up. I'll turn it to Mr. Trommels. The why. What is happening as a result of this project? We'll just go big picture, Mr. Trommels.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to back up a little bit, the full project encompasses quite a few moving pieces. We're upgrading the systems in the 911 centers. Those are old and out of date. We're updating the police records management system at the Rockford Police Department. What's before you tonight is to upgrade the Winnebago County Sheriff's records management system. All these systems are 12 years old. They're Motorola products. Motorola has issued us letters saying they've de-supported it. We have reached out to them for extended support agreements. They've come back with some numbers for that.
but we don't want to be living in this position for long. The hardware is equally as old. Difficult for us to find support agreements for that hardware. So that's most of the project. We've invited and we've given draft intergovernmental agreements to every law enforcement agency in the county. Our ambition and our goal, our hope is for the first time that we can get all police agencies on a single unified records management system so that they can better share information about crime and criminals. Today we share intelligence via phone calls, via faxes, literally police officers driving to other jurisdictions to pick up information about crime. It's very slow, very cumbersome. The model we're trying to achieve here of a county-wide records management system, we're not blazing new territory. Other counties do this in Illinois, so we're a bit behind the times in terms of sharing information effectively amongst law enforcement agencies, and this project aims to cure that.
Thank you very much. I had Mr. Fellers, then Mr. Webster, I believe. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I asked this question and I'm going to ask it again. How does the cost for joining this system compare to what we're currently paying for our existing records management?
Good question.
The capital would be new, but then the maintenance is comparable to what we pay now.
And so then the capital, if you don't mind to follow up, the capital is an additional roughly $100,000 and change a year?
Yeah, I think it was like 115 if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Thank you, Carla. Mr. Webster, then I believe Mr. Salgado. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Several years ago, we had problems where our systems weren't talking to each other, and I think that Gus is maybe familiar with this, but I know that we had made a lot of changes in that so that our so-called systems were talking to each other. And I'm talking about the court systems with the police, the county sheriff systems and all of that. Is this part and parcel of that, or is this replacing that, or is this an add-on to that?
I'll go to Mr. Trommels and on a follow-up there, but this is a separate issue. I'll let him explain.
Thank you, Chairman. So another goal of this project is to integrate some of the systems that the county runs, so the jail system, the court system. We've built in some what we call interfaces between those systems and this new records management system. And one of the features of the IGA that's before you tonight is City of Rockford is going to contract with the Winnebago County IT department to build those interfaces. Since they manage those systems, they maintain them, they understand them, we're going to contract with the Winnebago County to build those interfaces, those systems for us. It's another goal of ours to drive efficiency in the squads for the officers, give them as much information at their fingertips as possible. So yeah, we are planning on doing that as part of this project.
Follow up, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, follow up. So I'm a little bit confused here. So the city is going to contract the county to do this work, correct?
Mr. Trommels.
So the City of Rockford is going to lead the project. We're contracting with a vendor to help us implement it. The piece that we're contracting with the county for is just for these interfaces to the jail system for mugshots and the court system, court and case management system, to drag information out of those systems and push it into the new records management system.
So that then there is a cost to the city and a cost to the county. That's the part I'm trying to
correct.
Mr. Webster, any other follow-ups? Just want to make sure I have you.
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Salgado.
Yeah, that was, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a similar question that Mr. Webster proposed. I saw the IGA and said between the city and the vendor and the county. So just, I wanted to get a little, if they can elaborate a little bit on how much the city is going to pay the county. I know it's, at this point in time, might be premature to get a dollar amount, but between the IGA, that's one. And then the other piece is, where's the money coming from for us to, with the capital hardware, whatever it is, plus the maintenance, has that been budgeted? I know it's 2019, thinking forward, are those funds available? Where are they going to come out of the sheriff's budget? Where the course records? I just would like a little bit more information on that. Thank you.
The first item, I'm going to go to Mr. Trommels. The second, I'll defer to Carla a little bit on future potential budget options, of course, that are yet to be determined, but I know where you're going with it, Mr. Trommels.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand your question correctly, I worked with Gus in Winnebago County IT. We came up with an estimate. To your point, it's sometimes difficult to estimate these things up front. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gettner, but we assumed a man-year's worth of time at the $69 an hour rate. So whatever that math is, we built into the overall project as our estimate for that work.
Okay. The second is next year related to the capital component of this project. Potential funding options, of course, yet to be determined. That would be in the fiscal year 20 budget process.
We had planned on the public safety sales tax fund paying for the capital portion, and then the maintenance would just be a replacement within the sheriff's budget of their current maintenance contract.
Thank you very much, Carla. Any other questions? I think we got to every hand that was up. Okay, with that, since there's no other questions, again, the item before the board is the management, shared records management software. I see Mr. Schultz. Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, I've just been mulling this over, and I just want to express that this was not clearly explained at caucus, and so this is literally the first time that I'm reading about it. And the numbers are in what was distributed this afternoon via email, but I appreciate the explanations. I think you did a good job explaining it. It would have been better for us to get more of this information earlier, because this is a substantial expense, but I am going to choose to err on the side of trust and vote in favor of it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to stress to the board, this is like a hard pill to swallow, but it's something that I think all of us that have been involved in law enforcement, public safety, have seen coming. And I think it's something that we as a board are going to have to swallow that pill, because technology is moving ahead, and I think that this system is going to greatly reduce the man hours that the deputies and officers are going to have to work on the street. But you also have to understand, this is going to also combine records from Duran, Pecatonica, Cherry Valley, and Loves Park into one system. So that way, if there is, I'm just going to give you an example. We were talking about domestic violence. We're going to be able to pull these names. These names are going to be able to go with flag because of that. And I think it's important that we move forward on that, even though it is a hard pill to swallow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Any other questions, comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next is an ordinance for layover. The ordinance is amending Chapter 14 of the Winnebago County Code. This ordinance would basically be fee structures, but what we did is we don't have the proper wording in this ordinance, and the only thing that the ordinance is going to do is give the Animal Services Director the option to waive some fees if he finds it's necessary to remove the animal from the shelter and bring it back to a home. So I would like to put this in for first reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
And that concludes our report.
Okay, any unfinished business? Okay, any new business? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Jury, second by Mr. Wilson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Have a good evening.